Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. A question I'm never asked is, how do you know when you have too much silver? I had mentioned the concept of having too much silver in a prior video, and was kind of met with some dismay from the community. How can one have too much silver? Just didn't make sense, especially for some of us in the community that really do have a whole lot of silver. We're talking several contracts worth. But believe it or not, I really do feel there are situations and cases where one can't have too much silver. And so it's a concept and an idea that we should be thinking about. And when we evaluate our wealth and our holdings, because there is a chance in time where, you may have too much of something, and sometimes too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. So we're going to explore this concept a little bit in this video. And as you see before you here, we have a wide variety of silver pieces here. And we're going to kind of take a look and answer the question is, how do you know when you have too much silver? Now, the answer will be different depending on the individual and the type of accumulator you are of silver and the styles and forms that it comes. So the first thing to explore, the first idea to kind of contemplate is, can you afford to acquire more silver? So in other words, you may have an accumulation of silver, but your financial circumstances have changed, and you realize that you can't afford to get any more. And so with that kind of concept, when you can't afford to get any more, well, then what you have is enough. And so that's how you know you've had enough silver, at least for the time being, because you can't afford any more. And it's about being fiscally responsible. That's the lesson there. Now, circumstances change, and you can afford to get more than you can accumulate more. But for that time, when you can't afford to purchase any more silver for one reason or another, well, then that means you have enough silver, and maybe too much if you can't afford to keep it. Now, that's a very simple and obvious concept to most people, because it's, it obviously makes sense that if you can't afford to keep your silver, well, then you have too much in your stash and you need to sell some in order to make ends meet. And that case, it's serving its purpose, and you can liquidate, because if it's not serving your needs as opposed to your wants, well, then you have too much. And the only reason I'll make mention of that is because you'd be surprised, and we've seen it in this community before, where people overextend themselves and they're forced to sell for reasons that are within their control because of fiscal irresponsibility. There's been other cases in this community where people have needed to sell, and that is a case where silver works for them, and it's serving that purpose. Now, the next concept is the idea of having and holding silver pieces that, well, and this is going to sound kind of embarrassing, but you have too much silver when you can't keep track of it all. In other words, you may find pieces of silver laying around, or particular ones that you didn't realize you had. You'd forgotten you'd purchased them. And a lot of that is based off organization. I know that the couple folks that come to mind that do have a lot of silver, they pretty much account for every ounce, and they kind of know where it all is. But there could be times when people accumulate so much and at such a rate in different forms and formats that they lose track of it. And if you lose track of it, is the next step? Does that mean that you have too much silver? Well, in some cases, yes, but in other cases, no, because it's a pleasant surprise that you found some more silver that you didn't know you have. So that doesn't necessarily turn into an idea or to this notion that you have too much silver, but it could be a warning sign as such. And then the last and final, and there could be more, but the last and final concept or idea in my mind, when you know you have too much silver, is when you have run out of ways to store it or to keep it. And that is a real problem with some in the community, because silver, being as what it is, it's a lot less expensive than gold, and people can accumulate the different forms and different styles as you see here, or even if they stack eagles or large silver bars as such, well, they can accumulate a lot of it, but it takes up a lot of space to store. And they may be running out of that space for one reason or another, and may not have the luxury of being able to store it in multiple locations. And so therefore that becomes a sort of a dangerous precedent, because if you can't find a place to store it, then it puts it at risk. And you just may have enough silver. You know, you may have plenty of storage space, but you've just accumulated so much that you have enough in your holdings at a particular point in time. And there's different ways to store silver, obviously. Even having a capsule such as this can take up exponentially more room than having the raw pieces themselves. But then when you have collector silver, you have packaging and the like, and that's with really most any coin for the collectors where it becomes an issue. But in terms of silver itself, you know, you accumulate so much of it, you run out of a place to store it. Now, there is one, and sort of an afterthought, that as far as in terms of when you know you have too much silver, is when it's outweighs your other, quote, investments or hedges out there. In other words, and this is, by the way, this is not true for everybody, and I'm not passing judgment on anyone for holding these views, but let's say someone is all in on silver, and they ignore gold or other investment opportunities that are safe out there. I've always been a fan of diversification, and even within precious metals. And so if someone holds, too much of one thing, well, could that be a warning sign that maybe they're holding too much silver? And again, this is not, something that is, or any of these things are true for everybody. It's just some food for thought for those of us who accumulate. Because I know for myself, there was a time where I just started accumulating a lot of silver and realized, you know what? Do I need this much? Do I want more? What kind of silver do I want to purchase? And I'm still a buyer of silver. But, I've kind of evaluated for the reasons I mentioned. And again, it's not to say that I have some huge, vast amount of silver compared to others in the community that have a lot more. But because everyone is different. For one person, 1,000 ounces may be enough. For another person, 200 ounces might be enough. For another person, 5,000 ounces may not be enough for them. So it really depends on the individual and what their holdings are. Are they diversified in other assets and other ways of earning money and being fiscally responsible? I would dare say that those who hold a lot of silver have probably thought it out well ahead in advance and know what they're doing as far as holding and where their money goes for other things other than silver. But it is a real fear in this community, because we do see these metals as a hedge against economic instability, and they are. Silver is, I think, as well, and some may argue just as much as gold, especially considering that silver has probably been the closest form of money being used as practical money, only not even maybe a couple of generations ago, when it was used as money for everyday transactions. And so it makes sense to hold it. But nonetheless, I do think that, accumulating, and I don't know what your magic number is. I've heard 1,000 ounces from time to time from folks out there, from different commentators that say 1,000 ounces is enough if we were going to have some major crisis in our hands. And that very well may be. But for others, it may be more than that. And I think the majority of the members of this community certainly are wise enough to know their limits. And but just keep in mind, and the food for thought for this video is that there can be a time when you can have too much silver. When is that for you? That's something you'll have to answer. But I hope this video has served as food for thought regarding this subject, and I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to y'all for watching, and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.